Thank you for tuning in to this hopefully brief message about beautiful music in the park, what it has been, and what is happening with it. Back in the fall of 2022, I had the idea that I would love for other people in other parts of the country and more people in my little town in Southern Oregon to have the experience of amazing musicians being encountered in public park spaces and creating a little scene like what I've experienced over more than a dozen seasons now in Lithia Park in Ashland, Oregon. So I thought I would start a nonprofit to raise money to be able to support extraordinary musicians playing in public parks. At the beginning, the idea was to try to create a network of musicians all over the country. And one incredible musician, Kimberly Starkey, in Iowa, raised her hand and said that she would like to be a guinea pig for the project. So my first job was to try to raise enough money to get one musician supported in Lithia Park and to get Kimberly supported in some park at the time I think she was in Cedar Rapids. No, she was in Ames or Des Moines, and then she moved to Cedar Rapids. And I was trying to operate off a similar model to myself, which is that I have supported myself completely in tips from people passing by, seeing what I do, and putting some money in my case. It is not, let us say, a full-time living, but I worked it out at a certain point and I realized that I was making more per hour than the average symphony musician. A symphony musician job is a whole job that you have a whole season, and most symphony musicians supplement their jobs with teaching, and so it's not exactly comparable. But what's amazing about it is that as a musician, you get to communicate directly with the public. And that's what always appealed to me about it. So I just started beating the bushes. I started talking to people. I started asking questions. I started doing whatever I knew how to do. There was, at one point I was knocking, I was trying to get into businesses downtown, bigger businesses that might have the ability to sponsor perhaps a musician or something like that. And I met so many really good people along the way. And I think about in January, I was doing this online. There were some little bits and pieces of money that was coming in. One of our very first supporters put in $10 and she said, I don't know whether this will help, but I'm behind you. It was so beautiful. And then a bigger, maybe like a $2,500 chunk came in from a big supporter of the arts in Ashland. And at that point, I began to have heart that it might be possible. This thing might come off. Meanwhile, I was trying to see if I could get to a certain level so I could guarantee a certain amount of support for a musician here. Who is that musician going to be? And Kimberly in Iowa. And it turned out a violinist who I had known and actually hired for some recording sessions, Kathleen Strom, was open to trying it, as long as she got a certain guarantee. And that was the whole idea. Like most classical musicians, really good musicians, they just need to know what they're going to make if if they are signing up for a gig. And so we made an arrangement with her. Meanwhile, Kimberly was really having a hard time finding a park in Iowa where people would gather. It just didn't seem to be a viable thing there. And eventually there was an indoor market that we were able to support her to play at for a while. We got her a power station for her keyboard. So we sort of tried to jumpstart her situation, and I think she got a really good gig at a local concert venue there in Cedar Rapids as a result of her performances in this indoor market. And meanwhile, Kathleen had started with me in the park in May of 2023, and she just did really well from the start. It was amazing to watch because she came up with a whole repertoire of movie soundtrack music and popular tunes and things that were danceable. There was a couple that started doing the Argentine tango very early on in one of her sets that let me know that this was going to work. She was going to have her own audience. In fact, there was a day when I came to the park and a woman came up and said, well, is the violinist going to play? And I said, well, I'm coming at 10. Kathleen's going to come at 12. And this woman said, well, I know you're probably good, but I want to listen to the violinist. So at that point, I was like, okay, we've got a winner. And then in the summer of 2023, I have been able to organize a benefit with Doug and Dion Irvine at the Irvine Roberts Winery outside of town. And they are such beautiful people. And Dion just totally picked up on what I was attempting to do. She got it, and she was masterful in the way that she helped to orchestrate that event. Doug seems to be the creative force behind many of the things that they do together. So it was a pleasure to work with them, and we had an incredibly successful benefit, which really helped to launch us into the second part of the season. We got good publicity. Bert Ettling at Ashland News ran a couple of stories about us. And I made the decision at that benefit to form a quintet to play some of my compositions and some arrangements of things that people would recognize. This was one of the best things for me about the whole project, is that I got to compose and arrange for an actual ensemble, because most of the playing that I've been doing over the years has been me with backup tracks. And okay, that's cool. People like it. I was told recently by one of our board members that he actually prefers me playing solo more than this little group that we put together. So that was interesting feedback. But as a musician and as a composer, to have that opportunity was an incredible opportunity. And I made it a focus of our project. I wanted for the second year to have a whole series of concerts. There was one point in the fall of 2023 when we were doing one of the quintet concerts, and randomly the owner of one of our local restaurants, a wonderful woman named Melissa, came in and listened to this performance, and she said, "This is so incredible. Do you do this every Tuesday evening?" And of course, we weren't doing it every Tuesday evening because it was an expensive thing to put on. Each of these musicians were getting the kind of pay that they ought to get for a performance. We were treating it like an open rehearsal because we couldn't really afford to have rehearsals, and that was an interesting format. It was good in the way that it allowed a sort of informality to the performances that I think was appealing in some way to some of the people. It was kind of hair-raising to me because there were pieces that I was having the ensemble play for the first time that we'd never played before, and I didn't know how they were going to come off. So I forged ahead in season 2023. I was able to apply for and receive a grant from the Jackson County Cultural Coalition to help create that pilot project of a series of concerts of the quintet in 2024. I applied for some funding from the Carpenter Foundation. That was a whole process. We didn't end up receiving any funding from the Carpenter Foundation. And by the time the 2024 season began, I was fully occupied composing for the quintet, arranging pieces for the quintet, organizing the schedules of the quintet, beginning to organize the schedules of other musicians that would be playing. We did a big fundraiser at Ashland Springs Hotel in April of 2024, which was a marvelous success, and from that, a real team developed, a number of very powerful people who just dove in and helped make that an incredible success. And we didn't have that long to organize it. I decided we were going to go ahead and do this. It was a massive thing to try to pull off. I think we had about 80 people, and I look back at it and I don't even quite know how we did it. Along with this, I received personally a grant to do a little documentary, a little documentary about music in the park, about the history of music in the park. And over the course of the season, we shot a lot of footage. I had a little team. I would say there wasn't enough clarity to put together the actual finished project yet. And it will be completed, but we're going to need some things to be able to complete it, because we kind of expanded the scope of what my original idea was. We have footage of the fiddlers in the park, Creekside Strings. We have footage of a lot of other musicians that play in the park. We have footage of David West, who was the Indigenous Studies professor at SOU, who was talking to us about the original people who were living in that area. And we have footage of John Enders, who wrote the book about Lithia Park, talking about the history of the park. It's quite incredible what we documented, but it all has to be put together in a coherent way. And that is basically falling to me at this point to bring all those pieces together. And there was generous funding that continued even in the middle of the summer, which made it possible to have many different musicians come to the park. None of them, except for one violinist. Kathleen wasn't available for the season of 2024, but Esther Aviana Platt played solo violin with backup tracks, and she was marvelous. She did an incredible job, and she really developed a little audience for her music. It was really beautiful to watch. She was an inspiration, and really all the musicians were inspiring. It's just that it appears as if string players seem to have an advantage in that setting. And so then I began to develop the idea for next season, the 2025 season. And my idea was about doing a national search for young cellists who would come, and having an artist in residence program where, 2 weeks at a time or 3 weeks at a time or a month at a time, there would be a young cellist who would play in the park. I would keep playing, but there would be a spot for them, a time space for them. And the more and more that I looked at it, the more and more that I analyzed what the basic premise of this thing has been. For me, it's been about something that you might call my legacy. Having some other people carry on what I'm doing now in the park. And two things occurred to me. One is it was going to take most of my time and most of my energy to be able to create a sustainable organization that would make it possible to do such a national search, to find such cellists, to figure out ways to house them when they came, to pay them well enough for them to be attracted to being able to do it, and to be dedicated in that way so completely was necessarily going to have to prevent me from pursuing my own work, which primarily is composing music. So the second thing was, though, that maybe there isn't anyone that can or will carry on the thing that I have done in the park. Maybe I'm a unique and strange person who decided to do this, who had enough skill and enough art to gain the goodwill of this beautiful community and be supported over all this time from doing this ritual. Maybe if I mentored someone for weeks or months, it would still not appeal to them as the thing that they wanted to do. So I really had to look at that, and at a certain point I had to decide the best thing to do is to let this thing go. And it is also because at my particular time in life, I need to make the most of that time. And if I'm going to create some beautiful content and beautiful musical compositions and share that goodness with the world, I need to be about it. So that is what I decided to do. Today is November 20th. On November 19th of 1974, which would that be 50 years ago? Yes, 50 years ago, I learned the technique of transcendental meditation. And that's a whole other story of my life. I became a teacher of transcendental meditation, and I played music for Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in India, and for thousands of people in that meditation movement. And I can look back on it all as a long meditation, and I can look at what is to come as a long, beautiful meditation. I'm going to describe for all of you in another video, which will be linked wherever this video lives on my website, about the history of my composition of musical portraits, and especially the history of the musical portrait as a product, because it will continue to be a product, and it is I'm sure going to evolve, and I want to share that with everyone because there's a very particular incredible opportunity that everyone has now if they sign up for a subscription on my site under Creative Path, where you can get a massive discount on the going rate for a musical portrait. So I want to describe how that has come about and what is involved in commissioning a musical portrait, and I hope you join me on that video. Thank you so much for listening. I know I'm a long-winded fellow, but some of it is interesting. All right, I'll be talking to you later.